There's a certain kind of person who walks into a room and notices something before anyone has actually said it out loud. Everyone seems normal enough. The conversation is flowing, people are smiling, nodding, reacting at the right moments, but something in you catches what sits underneath all of that. The tension in someone's voice, the pause that lasts half a second too long, the way a person says they're fine while their whole presence suggests otherwise. You may have spent a lot of your life thinking this makes you different in a way that is hard to explain. Not dramatic, not broken, just somehow out of sync with the pace most people seem comfortable living at. You pick up on things quickly, but you process them slowly. You feel more than you show. You understand more than you can always put into words. And because of that, people often misunderstand you. Some assume you are too sensitive, others decide you are distant, guarded, overthinking, too serious, too quiet, too intense. Sometimes people come to you because they feel understood by you, but very few stop long enough to wonder what it feels like to be you. It can create this strange experience where you are deeply seen for what you give, yet rarely understood for what you carry. And that is where this begins to matter. Because there's a type of person that people often notice but rarely explain correctly. A rare type of person is not someone better than everyone else. It is not a flattering label or a personality trophy. It simply means your inner wiring may be less common. The way you take in information, emotionally process experience, respond to the world, and relate to other people may be organized a little differently from the average. There is usually more happening inside you than people realize. And that is where this begins to matter. Because there's a type of person that people often notice but rarely explain correctly. A rare type of person is not someone better than everyone else. It is not a flattering label or a personality trophy. It simply means your inner wiring may be less common. The way you take in information, emotionally process experience, respond to the world, and relate to other people may be organized a little differently from the average. There is usually more happening inside you than people realize. Psychology has spent years observing differences in sensitivity, emotional processing, social perception, and reflective thinking. Some people genuinely process more input at once. Their nervous systems register more subtle shifts. Their attention is drawn not just to what is obvious, but to what is implied. Research around sensory processing sensitivity, emotional attunement, and interoception suggests that some individuals are simply more responsive to nuance. They notice more, they absorb more, they reflect more deeply on what they have absorbed. In real life, that does not always look like a gift. Sometimes it looks like replaying a conversation long after it ended because you were not only listening to the words but also to the silence around them. Sometimes it looks like feeling tired in environments that others find completely normal because your brain has not filtered out as much stimulation. Sometimes it looks like sensing what another person is feeling before they are ready to admit it themselves. And that kind of perception can become exhausting. A lot of people with this kind of inner world did not become this way by accident. For some, it began early. They grew up in environments where it was important to read the emotional weather in the room. Maybe the adults around them were unpredictable. Maybe love was present, but tension was too. Maybe no one explained what was happening directly, so the child learned to study tone, expressions, distance, and shifts in energy just to feel oriented. In other cases, there was no obvious instability at all. Some people were simply born with a temperament that was naturally more perceptive, more inward, more responsive. But whatever the path, the result can look similar. The nervous system learns that subtle cues matter. It becomes practiced at scanning, interpreting, anticipating, understanding. Over time, that stops feeling like a strategy and starts feeling like your personality. But very often, what people call your personality began as adaptation. That does not mean all depth comes from pain. It does mean that many of the traits people judge on the surface have roots that are more intelligent than they seem. Your caution may have been a form of protection. Your silence may have been a way of staying regulated. Your ability to read a room may have come from needing to feel safe before you could fully relax. So, if you have ever felt ashamed of how deeply you feel or how long it takes you to process things, there may be a more compassionate explanation. Your system may have learned that paying close attention was necessary. There is no morally correct way to be a person. That is part of what makes this difficult to talk about honestly, because people often romanticize rare traits, when in reality every configuration comes with both strength and cost. If you are this kind of person, one of the strangest things about you may be how contradictory you appear from the outside. You can love people deeply and still need a great deal of solitude. You can be highly empathetic and still withdraw suddenly when you feel overwhelmed. You can be emotionally generous and also extremely selective about who gets access to your inner world. To someone who does not understand this, those things can look inconsistent, but they are not. For some people, authenticity is a preference. For others, it is almost biological. They are often the natural consequence of feeling more, noticing more, and reaching your limit sooner than others realize. That is one of the quiet paradoxes of rare people. The more finely tuned someone is, the more carefully they often have to protect their energy. The more deeply they understand human complexity, the harder it can become to trust quickly. Not because they are arrogant, not because they think no one is good enough, but because they know how much of life is hidden behind performance, politeness, and coping. They know that not everyone wants to be truly known. Another sign is that it may be unusually difficult for you to betray yourself for long periods of time. You may be able to adapt. You may know how to be agreeable, appropriate, and functional. But when your life starts drifting too far from what you actually feel, your system tends to react. Maybe through fatigue, maybe through numbness, maybe through irritability, brain fog, or a strange sense of emptiness that appears even when everything looks fine on paper. When there is too large a gap between the outer self and the inner experience, something in the body begins to protest, and that comes with another hidden cost. People like this often struggle with simple answers. They tend to see multiple truths at once. They understand that people can be loving and harmful, confident and frightened, honest and defended, all at the same time. They do not easily divide life into heroes and villains, right and wrong, strong and weak. They see the messier reality in between. That can make them wise. It can also make them lonely, because not every conversation has room for nuance. Not every relationship can tolerate depth. Not everyone is interested in what sits beneath the surface. And yet, this way of being carries something deeply valuable. People who feel like this often become a kind of psychological shelter for others. They create space without trying to dominate it. They notice what is hard to say. They offer presence instead of performance. Around them, people often feel a little less alone, a little less judged, a little more permitted to be real. The irony is that these same people often spend years believing there is nothing particularly meaningful about the way they are, only that they are too much in the wrong places and not enough in the right ones. But maybe that was never the truth. Maybe you were not difficult to understand because something was wrong with you. Maybe you were difficult to understand because you were using the wrong measuring system. A world that rewards speed, certainty, surface charm, and emotional efficiency does not always know what to do with someone whose strengths are depth, nuance, restraint, and inner honesty. That mismatch can make you question yourself for years. But being rare does not mean being unnatural. It may simply mean your system is tuned for a different kind of awareness. And if that is true, then some of your most confusing traits may start making sense. The overthinking may partly be deep processing. The withdrawal may partly be nervous system recovery. The caution may partly be pattern recognition. The loneliness may partly come from how difficult it is to find people who can meet you where you naturally live. None of that means you are damaged. It means your experience has logic. And sometimes healing begins the moment you stop asking, "What is wrong with me?" and start asking a quieter, more accurate question. What has my system been trying to protect? That question changes the tone of everything, because it shifts you out of shame and into understanding. Not self-excuse, not self-importance, just a more honest relationship with your own design. And that may be the beginning of something important. Because once you start seeing yourself clearly, another question usually follows close behind. Why do people like this so often feel alone even when they are loved? And the answer to that says even more about who you are than most people ever realize.